There is a version of you that you have never introduced to anyone, a version that exists in the space between what you say and what you actually feel, between the person you perform every single day and the one who stares back at you in the silence of 3 a.m. when the noise finally stops. Most people spend their entire lives running from that version. And the strange thing is, the faster they run, the more of their life that hidden version quietly controls. This is not a video about becoming a better person. It's not about motivation or healing or any of the comfortable words we use to avoid the real conversation. This is about something far more uncomfortable, far more real. This is about the moment you finally stop running and what happens to your entire life when you do. If something in you already feels this, stay with it. Like this video. Subscribe to Solitude Theory, because what we explore here is not for everyone. It's for the ones who already sense there's something beneath the surface they haven't been willing to look at yet. Carl Jung called it the shadow. Not in a dark or demonic sense. Not in the way movies use shadows to signal danger. He meant something far more precise. Something far more personal. The shadow, in Jung's psychology, is the part of you that you rejected not because it was evil, but because at some point in your life, you were taught that it wasn't acceptable. You were too loud, so you became quiet. You were too sensitive, so you hardened. You were too angry, so you smiled. You took every part of yourself that made people uncomfortable, and you pushed it down, buried it, sealed it beneath layers of personality, performance, and social approval. And then you forgot it was there, but it never forgot you. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It doesn't dissolve when you pretend to be okay. It waits. And while it waits, it works. It shapes the relationships you choose, the people you're drawn to, the patterns you repeat no matter how many times you promise yourself you won't, the rage that appears out of nowhere and surprises even you, the sadness that lives just beneath the surface of your best days, the self-sabotage that ruins things right when they start to go well. None of it is random. All of it is your shadow trying to speak a language you never learned to hear. Here's the thing no one tells you about the shadow. You don't find it in your worst moments. You find it in your reactions, in the things that bother you about other people. Pay close attention to this, because this is where it gets uncomfortable in the most revealing way. The traits that irritate you the most in other people, the ones that make your jaw tighten, your patience shorten, your contempt rise quickly, those traits are almost always a mirror. Not always, but more often than you'd like to admit. When someone's arrogance makes you furious, there is often a part of you that wanted to be confident but was told it was wrong. When someone's neediness repels you, there is often a part of you that desperately wanted to need people but learned that dependency was weakness. The shadow projects. It takes what was suppressed inside and casts it outward, letting you see it everywhere except in yourself. This is called projection, and every single human being on this planet does it. Everyone. The difference between people who grow and people who stay stuck is not intelligence. It's not willpower. It's the willingness to pause in the middle of a reaction and ask one terrifying question. What does this say about me? Most people never ask that question, and the reason is not cowardice. The reason is that no one taught them how. We are raised in a world that rewards the performed self, the curated self, the self that is productive, agreeable, socially legible, emotionally manageable. From the time we are children, we are shaped by what gets us approval and what gets us rejection. And the parts of us that lead to rejection get buried. Over time, the burial becomes so complete that we genuinely believe we don't have those parts anymore. We believe we are our performance. We forget that somewhere beneath it all, the original self, the whole, unedited, unfiltered version is still there, waiting. The moment you begin to enter your shadow is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It usually begins quietly, as a kind of tiredness, a fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. A growing sense that the life you've built, though it looks right from the outside, feels hollow from the inside. People reach this moment at different ages. Some at 20, some at 40. Some never reach it at all. But when it arrives, something in you already recognizes it as the feeling that the person you've been performing is not the only version of you that exists. And that recognition is the beginning, not the solution, not the answer, just the beginning. Because what comes next is disorienting in a way that nothing prepares you for. When you start to look at your shadow, really look, not just intellectually acknowledge it exists, you begin to see how much of your life was built around hiding it. How many relationships you maintained to avoid feeling something you'd suppressed. How much of your identity was constructed to compensate for something you were ashamed of. How many of your choices were not really choices at all, but emotional escape routes dressed up as decisions. This is the psychological exposure that most people cannot tolerate. And this is exactly why most people never change at the level that actually matters. Shadow work is not journaling. It's not meditation apps or weekend retreats. It's the slow, uncomfortable, often disorienting process of sitting with yourself long enough to let the buried parts surface. It's the willingness to feel the grief you pushed down, the anger you were taught to hide, the longing you convinced yourself you'd outgrown. It's not comfortable. It's not clean. And it doesn't follow a schedule. But what it produces, and this is the part that changes everything, is wholeness. Not perfection. Wholeness. The experience of being a full human being instead of a carefully managed fragment of one. Here's what life actually looks like after you enter your shadow honestly. You stop being triggered by the same things. Not because you became immune, because you recognized what the trigger was pointing to. You stop attracting the same kinds of people, not because you issued a declaration, because the wound that was magnetizing them began to heal. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't have the capacity to understand. Not because you became cold, because you no longer need the validation to feel real. Your relationships deepen not because you became more charming, but because you became more honest. And the honesty you found first was with yourself. There is something that happens in a person's eyes when they have done real shadow work, not the look of someone who has figured everything out. Almost the opposite. It's a quietness, a lack of performance, a kind of groundedness that doesn't require anyone else's approval to stand. You've seen this in people, the ones who are not trying to impress you, the ones who are not performing confidence or warmth or intelligence, the ones who simply are, and you felt drawn to that without fully understanding why. What you were sensing was integration. The alignment between who they are inside and who they allow themselves to be in the world. That integration is what the shadow, when finally welcomed, ultimately offers. Not the removal of your darkness, not the elimination of your contradictions, but the ability to hold your whole self without flinching, to know what you are capable of the light and the dark, and to move through the world from that knowledge rather than from fear of it. Jung believed that the greatest danger was not the shadow itself, but the unconscious shadow, the one operating in the dark, unnamed, unexamined, making decisions on your behalf while you believe you are in control. The moment you name it, something shifts. The moment you look at it without looking away, something in your psychology fundamentally reorganizes. Not into perfection, into truth. Most people will never do this work. And that is not a judgment. It is one of the most difficult things a human being can undertake. It requires a tolerance for discomfort that goes far beyond what most of us were ever taught to develop. It requires sitting with yourself in ways that our distracting, noise-filled world actively discourages. It requires the courage to discover that you are not entirely who you thought you were, and to decide that is not a catastrophe, but a liberation. If you are watching this and something in you feels recognized, not comfortable, but recognize that feeling matters, that is not anxiety. That is not dysfunction. That is the beginning of something real. The part of you that reached for this video already knew something was waiting to be looked at. You don't have to have it figured out. You don't have to know what your shadow contains or where it came from or what it costs you. You just have to be willing to start looking. Slowly. Honestly. Without the need to immediately turn what you find into something presentable for the world. Because the moment you enter your shadow self, truly enter it, not as a concept, but as a lived psychological experience, your life does not suddenly become easier, but it becomes real in a way it wasn't before. And for the people who have spent years living inside a performance they built to survive, real is the most profound thing they have ever felt. The shadow is not your enemy. It never was. It is the part of you that was never given permission to exist. And somewhere inside you, it has been waiting not to destroy you, but to finally, at last, be seen.